What's up, Moto Buddies? Mike here from Taco Moto Co. Today we're going to do a battery shootout. This is a 24 chassis KTM product. This is the same new chassis, new battery box design that you get in a Gasgas, Husqvarna, and a KTM. And it's all new. And so unfortunately, with this new battery box, the dimensions have changed. And so the previous generation batteries that used to fit in there may or may not. In the old ones, you had a battery box that was back down here and it was larger, had a greater capacity, and you had better variability with battery options. Now with this new chassis, you're more limited, and so unfortunately some of the best batteries available don't fit in the stock battery box. There's some modifications that you can do, and we will do another video of that where you can fit some of those bigger batteries, but you have to do some cutting and some grinding and some changing here to this battery box. This new lid right here, this little battery holder, you can see that it's formed into this bottom tray. And so the tray that fits into the outer cavity here for the new carbon composite subframe, you can remove this. If you see how much flexibility there is, see this lip right here? This edge is that softer plastic, and it's a tray, and it lifts in and out. And so that thing I'm moving there, and then this darker area here, this is the carbon composite. And so you're not going to modify that. So there's nothing structural about this. This is just the inner tray, and that inner tray holds like the studs that do the ECU and some of this other stuff. So it is possible to do that and to make those mods. And then you'll need to use some Velcro straps or a volley strap or something else to hold a larger battery down. Again, we're going to go into a separate video where we talk more about that. So in terms of overall battery choice, we've got different ones laid out here. And I want to take a minute and go over this sheet and tell you why we talk about the specific batteries that we do. Okay, let's take a look at our data sheet here and make some comparisons between our batteries. But before we do that, let's take a look at the bike load. So this is the electrical demand that the motorcycle itself takes, and these are expressed in watts. And let me point out here the stator number. And so the motorcycle that we're talking about here specifically is a KTM, Gasgas, Husqvarna. These are the enduro bikes. So this would be a plated bike. This is like an example is a KTM 500 EXCF or 350. So the class displacements could be 350, 500, 501. So on that KTM range, it'd be EXCF, and then like the new model XCFW. This is for the 2024 model designations. Husqvarna would be a FEW or an FES, and then Gasgas would be the EC model. So your stator is going to put out 196 watts, and that's rated at about 3 to 5,000 RPM. If you are running a lower engine speed, like idle, that will be less. That number will derate down. So these are constant demand on the bike, on the electrical system. So you have about 18 watts for the ECU, 15 on the injector, 21 on the fuel pump. So that's about 54 watts of total load, total constant load. Now there's a few variable loads, and that would be fan and then starter. Starter's going to pull between 40 and 60. Temperature will affect that. A cold start will be higher. A hot restart will be lower, and so that number varies. And also the fan isn't on all the time, and so it's okay to not factor these two numbers into the total demand because these aren't constants, but they do come into play. So like in a worst case scenario, if you're riding at low speeds, you're not getting 196 watts out of that stator. It might be derated 10%, 15, 20%. And then if you're running a lot of starter, you're pressing the starter button a ton and the fan's on, then your recharge rate is considerably lower than it would be if you were not using those and then you were running at higher RPM. So there's a lot of factors that go into how you calculate out what your gross and net power demands are. But we're doing this in kind of like a best case scenario. So you have a constant load of 54, 196 is your total. That gives you about 142 net. And that is where you're going to now divide out how much should we safely budget out for recharge rate. That's power that's going to go back to the battery. And then our user rate. And that could be lighting, things like GPS or charging a phone or heated grips, all that kind of stuff. So we can push that number higher if we're willing to make that number, if we can account for a lower number there, or if we know that we're going to have a lot of high speed. So when you look at an electrical system and what you're going to add to it, it's really important to ask the types of questions that will indicate what your use is, what your worst case scenarios are, and then what you can budget out for lighting. If we're going to build a Baja 1000 bike, we can go higher on our user margin because we might be willing to decrease our recharge rate, and we could even try to calculate that out to 0 so that we are running maximum lighting. And then if that's the case, we need a battery that is incredibly stout and has a lot of reserve capacity, a lot of watt hours in it to be able to accommodate some fan, unlikely fan, so let's take that one away, but some restarts. So there's quite a few decisions that need to go into what we do when we make lighting decisions, but let's not get hung up on that, talking about batteries. So my favorite battery, and the one that I choose to use pretty much exclusively in my bikes, and it's sad that it doesn't fit in the new 24 chassis without some modifications, is the Antigravity 8 cell. And there's two real reasons why I choose that battery. One is because it has a 240 watt cold cranking amps. And the cold cranking amps is its ability in a specifically rated cold temperature to provide a certain number of maximum amps for a certain duration of time. And you can do some research on what the CCA rating test valuations are. But this is a 240, and so that almost is like a punch. Like, how powerful can that battery punch the starter when it's cold, in cold conditions? And so that's the highest number of all the batteries. So that's important. But this is the one that matters most to me, and it's the watt hours. And so a watt hour is a representation of how much power reserve is in that battery to run a 1 watt load for 1 hour. And so if you had a 1 watt connected to a 58.4 watt hour battery, it'd run it for 58.4 hours. 1 watt, that's the draw. It would run that. So our bike pulls 54 watts. So that means it'll run for about an hour. That is to say, you could run the bike for just a couple of minutes over an hour. With no stator. And so this would be, the reason I picked this is because we may be in the very deep backwoods of Baja or somewhere up in Idaho or Colorado, and you could have some sort of malfunction where you lose your stator. And so in that instance, I would disconnect all my lighting, turn off my lighting. And so I'm just trying to get as close to this bike load as possible. I would probably, I would disconnect the fan. I wouldn't use the starter. I'd try to bump start the bike as much as possible. And if I did that, then on paper, I should be able to run the bike, and that factors in that takes into the assumption that the battery was at a full charge when the stator conked out. I could run the bike for an hour on the battery alone. And so for that very reason, that's why the Antigravity is my first choice. The Shore Eye is right there, really close behind it. Look, this number's not too far behind, and then it's just a tiny bit under an hour. So a Shore Eye is a great second choice battery too. So anybody would do really well to put either of these batteries in their bike. So we have to kind of ignore this line here though and go up to the top line, because these are batteries that will fit indigenously into the bike without any modifications. And so in first place up here is this Earthx. And the reason the Earthx, it has the highest CCAs of the group, and then it has the highest watt hours of the group. And so it'll run the bike for a little over 3/4 of an hour. And that's the best you're going to get out of that group. So that makes it the best battery, the best choice battery. Right in the number 2 position at 59 tenths of an hour, 0.59 of an hour. So that's just a little over, half an hour. You get the Athena battery, and then you can look at prices here and see that the Earthx is a pretty good deal, pretty good value for what it puts out. So in second place is the Athena battery, and you also want to look at warranty and see how those stack up as well. In third place would be this Firepower, which is these are all aftermarket batteries. Down here we'll touch on the Skyrich, which is the stock OEM battery. So that Firepower is pretty good cost. And then it's also at about a half of an hour as well. And you can see that these numbers on the CCAs start to drop as you go down in price point, and these numbers are going to drop in relative terms to each other as you move your way down the list. And so I've got my ranking here of the battery that I would put in and the choice I would rank it in. This Tusk battery here is a pretty good value at $110. And now you see that its reserve its watt hour rating is on par with the stock battery. And so if you were gonna, the Tusk battery would be a good choice if you were gonna replace your stock battery and you wanted to do that as economically as possible, then the Tusk would be a good way to go. The firepower, just with a little bit more reserve capacity, would be probably a better choice. So that's why it's number 3. Tusk is number 2. And then in last place would be the stock battery, that Skyrich battery. And here it's $0 because that's a sunk cost. It came with your bike for free when you bought it. And then if you were to replace it, it's very expensive, the most expensive. The dealer costs $170. And then you see that it has 24. So these two are in last place in terms of their power capacity. The Tusk edges it out, and that's probably why the Tusk is in next to last place, just because it's a pretty good price and it's got a little bit better on the CCAs. But the watt hours are the same, and so now you're under a half hour. So for me, my priority, ignoring cost, because look, the one I chose is the most expensive. So cost aside, up here in this column, you have the Earthx, and it's a little cheaper than that one. So this is my battery ranking chart right here. This is how I make a decision about what battery to put in my bike. And so I'm gonna, on my bikes for this new chassis bike, I'll put in either one of these. I'd be happy to run either one of them. I'll probably make sure to run that Earthx more often than not if possible. So this is the decision metric that we use when picking a battery. And again, we'll have another video soon where we talk about modifying your battery tray to put in the Antigravity or a Shorai. And let me know if you know of any batteries that we missed. I know that there's a few out there. Optimate came out with a new battery recently. And then you have MOTO Bat, that company has batteries as well. And we didn't include those in this ranking, but we very well may in a future issuing of this discussion. And if you can think of anything that we forgot or other batteries that you think are worthy of review, let us know. We'd be happy to include those. Hope you have a good 2024 riding season. Like, subscribe, go out, get some adventure.